Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to answer what is probably the single most common question I get, and that is how do I find campsites? I've spent hundreds of nights camped in the American West, and I've paid for 3 or 4 of those campsites. I very, very rarely pay for campsites. And so this video is about how I personally find pretty great, free, uncrowded campsites in the Western United States. I'm talking about the Western US because that's where I am, that's where I travel. There's a lot of public land here in the West. There's some in the East too, national forests and things like that. And so some of the things that I say will also apply everywhere, but I know specifically that everything I say will apply to basically the western half of the country. I think that this is a subject a lot of people overcomplicate. It's really easy to find campsites. There are basically 3 steps to finding a good free campsite, and the first is to know where public lands are. So when I say public lands, I'm talking predominantly about Bureau of Land Management lands, also known as BLM lands, which is basically a lot of the desert and a lot of like the high desert, the scrub in the western United States outside of cities and towns. And then also national forest land, which is basically the mountains in the western United States. There are a lot of other different kinds of public land. I can talk about those more in a future video, but for our purposes here and for simplicity's sake, let's just say that to find a good free campsite, you need to find public land, and the public land should be either BLM land or national forest land. And the reason we want these lands is that free dispersed camping is allowed on these lands. Basically, you can go into the national forest or out onto BLM land and you can camp anywhere as long as you're following a couple basic rules. Namely, if there's like no camping sign, or if there's a little enclave of private land in the national forest, for example, you don't want to camp there. And so the question becomes, how do you know where the national forest land is? How do you know where the BLM land is? There are a few different ways to do that. There's an app called US Public Lands that's available on both iOS and Android. I've used that in the past. It's not super accurate, but it gives you generally a good idea. There are websites where you can find maps and then have public land overlays on top of those maps. Caltopo.com is one really good example of that. So if you do have an internet connection, that's one way to go. But the method that I use mostly is to have a paper atlas. I have several of these state atlases for half a dozen of the western states. This one is Utah, obviously. This is where I live, so this one gets a lot of use. There are a couple of companies that make good state atlases. Delorme is a big one, and then Benchmark is another big one. I am partial to the Benchmark series. That's what these are. So if you just go onto Amazon and search for Benchmark Atlas Montana or Benchmark Atlas Arizona or California, you'll see those. And I think they only make them for the western states. And so the reason I like these maps is that I don't need an internet connection. So if I'm out in the middle of nowhere and I need to find a campsite, I can still do it. But they clearly have the national forest and the BLM lands marked. So the national forests are always named. For example, right now I'm actually in national forest now. I'm in Wasatch Cache National Forest in northern Utah. And if I look on the map, it says Wasatch Cache National Forest. BLM land doesn't have a name, but it is color coded, and so is national forest land. So in this atlas, for example, the national forest will be green and the BLM land will be yellow. I've opened up the atlas here to a section in central Utah. You can see it says Fish Lake National Forest, and you can see the green border here. So to the west is the national forest, to the east is not. And so let's go over here. You can see that this is largely yellow. So if we're up here, for example, you can see this yellow border. That marks BLM land. A lot of the yellow over here, BLM land. Here you can see the border nicely. Got the line here. On the left side is the green national forest. On the right side is the yellow BLM land. The second step, once you know where the BLM or the National Forest land is to go to that land. So drive out to the National Forest, drive out to the BLM land, and drive around until you see dirt side roads leading off. So just take the main dirt roads that go through the area, or maybe the paved roads that go through the area, and look for dirt side roads that lead off. Again, it shows those areas on this map in the atlas here. In both the National Forest and the BLM land, there's a dashed red line. That means that it's a pretty good, or at least passable dirt road. And then kind of the secondary dirt roads are a lighter dashed red line in my atlases here. So again, going back to the example, you're driving through the National Forest or the BLM land, you look for the side roads going off, and then the third step is to drive down those side roads. And you can do this several layers deep. You can keep going down. There's a fly attacking my camera. You can keep going down the side roads until you find campsites. And so basically, once you're on the dirt road, that's when you want to start looking for a campsite. You might say, how do I know if a place is a campsite? It'll be separate from the road that you're on, so you'll be able to pull off of the road, and almost always you'll see a fire ring. This is not an official like metal grill or anything like that. It's just a circle of rocks that people have put together, sometimes just like the charred remains of a campfire. Whenever you see that, you know you found a campsite. And unless it says otherwise, you can camp there. And really that's it. I think I got kind of lost in my 3 steps there, but the first step is to find out where the public land is. Second step is to drive around the public land. Third step is to go down the side roads and to look for the little pullouts and loops and things like that. And really, that's it. A lot of people try to make it super complicated. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to do. That's how I've found hundreds of campsites, hundreds of free campsites. I try to start looking for a campsite no later than about 2 hours before sunset. So this time of year, the sun sets at, let's say, 8 o'clock. And so at 6 o'clock, I'm in my car, I'm driving down dirt roads, trying to find a place to camp. I've never failed to find a campsite doing that. Usually I can find a campsite in, 15 minutes. Sometimes it takes 45 minutes. Sometimes your car can't make it down the dirt road that you wanted to go down, so you need to go down different roads in the area, and sometimes there just aren't pullouts. Sometimes it's just harder than others to find a campsite. But if you give yourself a couple hours, you won't have a problem. And that's it. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you have any questions. This advice isn't 100% accurate all the time. There are little pockets of public land that have more restrictions than others. So for example, like in California, if you're in National Forest very close to Los Angeles, for example, there will be more restrictions. Sometimes a lot of the little dirt side roads are closed off. But if you're away from major population centers, then you're okay. And some, like a very small amount of national forests, require permits that are usually free for dispersed camping. I've only heard of that once or twice in a couple of areas, again, usually closer to major population centers. I personally have never had to have a permit to camp on public land, or at least for the dispersed car camping that I'm talking about here on BLM land or National Forest land. And yeah, thanks for watching, and let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any questions.